Right off the bat, that Velma show, it's not very good. I'm not here to convince you that it's a good show because it is not a good show. It's not good. It's not a good Scooby-Doo adaptation. It's not a good Riverdale parody, and it's not a particularly good like meta self-aware mystery thing. I don't think it works as any of them yet. To be fair, it could be something that works itself out over time, but at least for now. And I think if you're talking about a pilot, if you watch The Office pilot, speaking of Mindy Kaling, but if you watch a pilot like that, you may go watch it and be like, this isn't quite right. Like it takes usually about a season for a show to really find itself. And you watch, season 1, 30 Rock, season 2, 30 Rock, season 1 Parks, season 2 Parks, like season 1 Sunny, season 2 Sunny, very different. However, you can usually see the promise of the show in that pilot. Like you can see something there that's like, you know what, that's pretty funny, or this dynamic is interesting. Maybe it's not perfect, but eventually this will work. And I just don't see that here. But that's not what this video is about. I'm not going to talk to you about why it's bad. There's going to be a million videos. I'm sure there's already tons of the same thumbnail with Rotten Tomatoes 0, and then, Velma making a face like, ooh. And then, the Jabornis are going to be out in force using, speaking of the Jabornis, they're going to, this is going to pay their rent for the next year, is this Velma movie, because, it's not very good. I want to say it's terrible because, again, I'll give it some time, but not a very good pilot. Now I'll say right off the bat, a couple things that I think are pretty not good. The fact that it starts with naked showering high schoolers is an insane choice, and I get what they're going for because they do have the characters say like, there are lots of nudity in pilot episodes, and it's like, I guess, but this not like this. This isn't a very accurate parody of anything, and also it kind of seems like the show's kind of have its cake and eat it too. Like it's gonna lampshade it, but also, like you do that joke in a different show where you have the characters talking about how there's a lot of nudity in shows like this, and then just have one character that's naked walk by, and everyone's like, hey, and then they walk by, and then they kind of go back to the conversation. This one sits in it for long enough that I'm like, this is for the fan art people too. Anyway, I don't love that. I don't love Shaggy. Not that I think it's a bad character. It's the one that feels the most off, and I don't quite know what's going on with this character. I think what they're doing with Fred is kind of funny. Some of it, first episode of Fred is good. Second episode of Fred, not so good. But I think at least it's not an incredibly inspired take, but it's a take on like rich kind of, popular guy. And I think the Velma and Daphne characters are interesting. And I think they're, the kind of what if Daphne was a drug dealer. That's not that interesting. But like, what if Velma and Daphne were friends and are falling out and kind of hated each other and were on opposite ends of the social like spectrum? I think that's kind of interesting. And then, spoiler alert, at the end of episode 2, they kiss, and it's like there's a thing going on there, and that's going to be something that we deal with going forward. Interesting enough, that's a take. That's something we haven't seen. Like obviously, we've seen Velma has flirted with a woman very recently, and we know James Gunn was going to do that, but they didn't let him in his Scooby-Doo movie. But this is the first time, I think, in any sort of canon, or at least official Scooby-Doo something, the Velma and Daphne have kissed. So that's cool. And I'm not a Scooby-Doo expert, so I might be wrong. But and not like that's cool because that makes it good, but just like that's something new that could go in a direction that's interesting. And I'm sure the Jabornis will come out in force because this show is not very good, and also they did a couple of things like they, changed the races of some of the characters, and some of the characters talk about different sexism and Me Too and stuff like that, and the show clearly has some targets. People it wants to make fun of rich people, sexist people, all that stuff, and whenever that happens, like with She-Hulk, the Jabornis will take it incredibly personally and decide to make a meal out of it. And, the thing I will say about them, Pillar of Garbage made a great video, really breaking down, like, I know you may like these guys, but like specifically in the Critical Drinker, his video, it just misrepresents, like he's lying. The things he's saying do not happen in the movie the way he is saying they happen, and he selectively edits it because he wants to, and this is me kind of, I don't think that Pillar of Garbage says this in the video, but they have a narrative that they want to support, which is that someone who is woke is bad, and all the media they make is bad. So even if something is good or interesting or clever, they're going to find a way to make that bad because it supports their narrative. And I don't think, I don't think that's very good. I don't think it's interesting. I feel like you, the audience, deserve better than that, and deserve honesty at least. So, there will be a video, I'm sure, in the next couple of days by all these jabronis where they'll make a bunch of really, really, boring kind of like Cards Against Humanity kind of jokes and say other things around like the writers have never written a good show and they're really bad and they don't care about the characters and they hate you, the audience, whatever. I don't care necessarily what the jabronis say. Because, hey, man, get that paper, I guess. I don't know what to tell you. But I will say, I think what some of them will say, or what some people will say that watch this show, because they're not just hate watching it, right? They will say, listen, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to watch a show that was good, and I hope the show was good, and it's just not. And I think what I want to give to you, the audience of this video, is I want to say, hey, let's say you didn't like Velma. Fine. But you wanted something else. Here are some other shows that are that. So here's other things that you can enjoy if you wanted certain aspects of Velma. Because there are other shows that have done what it's trying to do more successfully, very recently too. Enough so that I think it's worth pointing those out, because I think it proves that these things can be done. Like it proves that like there's not, changing the race of characters automatically sinks the show, or making a show about high schoolers automatically sinks the show, whatever. And B, doing these people that made this show, some of them at least, are good at this, and there are good versions of this show out there. So maybe there's just something with this version of, maybe the network messed it up. I don't know. But let's start there. Let's say you want an animated adult meta enough comedy show. I have two recent ones. And they're probably not going to be huge surprises, but the first one is Harley Quinn, which is the show Velma seems to be cribbing off of the most. I like Harley Quinn a lot. I don't think it's perfect, and I think some of its takes on characters are a little weird, but I think for the most part, it does what this show does a little bit, maybe not as interestingly, where it does take a character you're familiar with, like the Riddler or whatever, throw them in this universe and say, what's the take on them? What are we going to emphasize in a comedic way to make this character new and interesting? And with Riddler, they just make him a real annoying jerk. And they do other stuff over time. But think about Clayface, right? The character of Clayface is an actor, right? So they really zoom in on that. And their Clayface on Harley Quinn is not just an actor, but he is like a, John Lovett's acting thespian kind of actor who takes everything too seriously and is also kind of bad at it. And that's a take, and that's fun. I think it has, people will say, the jabronis, I'm sure, will say that part of what's wrong with Velma is that they're adding all of the politics, all the woke stuff, and they're having this character who hasn't usually been lesbian or bisexual or whatever it ends up being. They're having her do that because they want to be woke. And I do think Harley Quinn is a show that does that very well. And I think part of what maybe Harley Quinn does best is it's a slower burn, but also I just think those characters maybe have more chemistry than Velma and Daphne do over 2 episodes. So, we'll see. But I think if you want a show like Velma that I think is better at what Velma is trying to do, Harley Quinn's an easy one. It's on HBO, same network, probably some of the same animation team. And I will say, animation on Velma, very good. It is a very well animated show. It is not one of the kind of cheap turnaround, Netflix basketball cartoon. I don't know what it's called, but all those, animated shows that look the same. This one's pretty on, this looks like there's money there and the craft is good. And I like the character designs enough. I think the way that all of the characters look is fun. But the more important one, if you want a smart, meta, adult animated comedy, the best version of what Velma is trying to do is 100% what is probably, honestly, pound for pound, my favorite show ever made, The Venture Brothers. A lot of people have been bringing up Venture Brothers as an example of what is a good version of this, because Venture Brothers did a Scooby-Doo episode where, like, Fred was Ted Bundy and, Shaggy was Son of Sam and stuff like that. And that was the bit, and that they were just going around solving mysteries, but also just, like, doing murders. And it was very short. It didn't go for super long. But the first season of that show, and speaking of shows that first and second season, very different. First season does very much focus on parodying Hanna-Barbera characters and shows. So I would say episode 4, I think, of season 1 is called The Ghost of the Sargasso, which is a very direct parody of some of the Scooby-Doo villains, like the ghost pirate guys. I think it does what those shows do very well animation-wise. Like, it emulates that animation style very well. Also, it has really great dialogue. The characters just speak like people, and the juxtaposition of characters speaking like people, and then also in that media is very funny. Like, there's one bit where the main pirate reacts to something, and he, without really moving, because that's not how much they would animate it back in the day, he goes like, "Oh, wow, no way," or something. And it's just really, I don't know. I think it's underrated, and Harley Quinn is good at this too, of how funny it can be to have characters that don't usually talk like you and me talking like you and me. But over time, that show gets very complex, the relationships evolve, but it's that take on, like, what if these characters we all are pretty familiar with, and these archetypes are familiar with, the, little Johnny Quest boy adventurer kind of guy, and these little Hardy Boy children, and the super genius kid. They have a Doctor Strange, but they had, Dr. Orpheus long before Doctor Strange was a very popular character outside of people that read comics and watched the cartoons. And they take them to an extreme that almost always is something very new and very smart and very, like, surprising, but also reasonable. Like, you watch it and you're like, yeah, you know what? That is a good way to expand upon a character. Like, the Monarch is kind of, God, what's the Monarch kind of playing at? He's not like the Joker. He's a butterfly themed god. This is probably super obvious. I mean, honestly, a lot of his stuff is kind of James Bond villain, but he is a super villain. I mean, the closest analog is probably the Batman villain Killer Moth, but, like, that's not quite what he's going for. I'm sure this is super obvious and I'm just missing it. Because he has henchmen that all dress like him. He has a big floating cocoon. But, characters in that show are also very insecure. They deal with very relatable problems. A lot of people have said the show's about failure. I know the creators have said that's not quite it, but that is something that I think Velma is doing and trying to do. Harley Quinn is able to do very well, is write these characters that have usually been pretty one-dimensional. Not that Harley Quinn's always that, but like the Scooby Gang in the early, show was, and say, well, no, what if they had to, what if they weren't perfect? They didn't solve the mystery in one episode. Like, how would they deal with that? Venture Brothers, there's like 6 seasons. There's a mini movie, I think, that starts season 6. It seems like there might be a movie one of these days, which I cannot wait for. I cannot say enough great things about Venture Brothers. It's one of the best shows ever made. Animation is fantastic. Lots of voice actors you're pretty familiar with. They have a Fantastic Four parody that's really funny pretty early on. I guess you could say the Monarch's kind of Doom. He's not Doom, though. He's somebody else. He's someone else that I'm totally missing out on. Like, because he's insect themed. Are there those? I'm going to keep coming back to this. Every so often I'll think of a new superhero who I'm like, oh, is it this guy? And it's like, no, not really. Because he doesn't feel like a Spider-Man villain necessarily. And he doesn't feel like a Batman villain. Like I said, he kind of sounds like the Joker. He's got that nasally voice, but it's not quite what it is. I will just say, go in, watch the first 4 episodes of Venture Brothers, or just skip to Ghost of the Sargasso, which again, I think is episode 4. But the second season has a very different vibe. The introduction of a new character really changes things up in a way that is super fun. And I love Venture Brothers. And I think people have said, Antonio, I think in the book club will say, like, Harley Quinn's fun, but I like Venture Brothers' version of that a little bit more. And I agree. I do think a lot of the times Harley Quinn will do something funny, like have two goons just watching Ivy, Poison Ivy, who is like strapped to a table or something, just like chit-chatting about retirement. That's something that Venture Brothers does incredibly well. Especially if you're a good G.I. Joe fan. You know what? Honestly, that's what they're doing with the Monarch. The Monarch's really Cobra Commander. He sounds like Cobra Commander. He has goons. It's all very themed. Yeah, that's what they're going for. Okay. Let's say you don't want an animated cartoon, like comedy, meta, whatever. Let's say what you're looking for is you want a like children, younger person, let's say, focused comedy with a Mindy Kaling self-insert. And you want one that focuses on characters of different, like ethnicities, gender, all kinds of stuff like that. Very, very, forward-thinking kind of show. And because Velma's going for that too, they definitely at least pay some, like they pay a little bit of attention to that, although I don't think it always works. Sex Lives of College Girls, also on HBO, is a really, really funny show. I know the title's a little much, but A, they're in college, so it's not as weird as this show, which, Velma, there's no reason why they're in high school. Just put them in college. So far, at least 2 episodes in, they don't really go to high school that much anyway. Like, just have them be adults, and you can do so many more things without making it creepy. But, Sex Lives of College Girls, it is about 4 girls, one of them played by Timothée Chalamet's sister, and it's interesting because she has kind of the same face. Like, there's a Chalamet face that you see, and it's hard to not see. But it's about these 4 girls who end up being roommates who are very different, and then, they have different, goals, and they become friends and have problems and stuff like that. I think it's a very funny show. I think it's a little schmaltzy, which is not always for me. But I do think the comedy, when it's going full comedy, like when they're just making jokes, very strong. It gets some good audible like laughter out of me. And it's proof that you can make a show focused on, female focused show with a Mindy Kaling self-insert character very clearly, and have it be a woke show, and it can be funny. I think one thing that people always say about woke shows is that they just can't, they always make fun of the same people. Like they always make fun of, like kind of, not scarecrow, what's the word? Scapegoat's not the word, straw man. They make fun of straw men, like Republicans and misogynists and stuff like that. And they've got those in that show. But one of the things I really like about Sex Lives of College Girls is they also make fun of liberals. They're it feels like the show doesn't necessarily have an agenda as much as the agenda is, this is what a college campus is like. Let's make it funnier. And it's good. I think it's a really good show. I have not watched Never Have I Ever. I've heard good things about that too. But I just haven't seen it. And Sex Lives of College Girls, also like Velma, focuses on 4 characters. There's 4 of them. So, that one's a good version. But let's say that's not what you're here for. You're here for the mystery. You want a mystery show, maybe focused around high school, focused around a younger audience, with Sam Richardson, who plays Norval in Velma. And you're like, Velma, so far the mystery ain't cutting it, and also the rest of the characters aren't that compelling. Apple TV Plus this year, or beginning of last year, 2022, The After Party is so funny, by Chris Miller and Phil Lord, I think is their names. The Lego Movie and 22 Jump Street guys. They have the show. The show is basically very simple. Kind of, there's a reunion, high school reunion that the 20-ish year olds, not 20-year-olds. This is a 10-year-old high school reunion, maybe 20. Oh God, I don't know. Some high school reunion, whatever age Sam Richardson is now, he's going to that. And that's the age you would expect. And, they go to that. One of the characters, who played by Dave Franco, is a popular musician, a kind of Justin Bieber type, I guess. And he has an after party for the reunion. During the after party, he dies. He is murdered. No one knows who did it. So then Tiffany Haddish, the main detective, shows up and she questions all 6 major characters individually and hears their stories. And their stories are all told. So each story is one episode in the style that they think their life is. So like the second character, played by Ike Barinholtz, who's great, is a Fast and the Furious fan. So his movie, like, what does she call it? Like, she calls it like your mind movie or something. Everything in his life, he sees himself as like Dominic Toretto. And one of the things they do really well in that show is it is filmed like that. So it really does feel like you're watching a Fast and Furious movie, or, you know, not to spoil what the rest of them are, but it's a really smart show. Sam Richardson is the lead. I think he's fantastic in it. I do think on our podcast, Mostly Nitpicking, friend of the show, or not friend of the show, friend of the channel, but member of the show, Chris Diggins, coined 2022 as the year of the mystery. I think that, like, between that, Only Murders in the Building, Glass Onion, there were quite a few of those that were pretty good. So you have a lot of good murder mysteries. I'm just getting into Only Murders. I'm like 2 episodes into the second season, and I enjoy it. But I will say the After Party feels like, if you want a very strong, character-focused, very silly murder mystery show, then that's your man right there. I am not the biggest Scooby-Doo fan. But if you want a Scooby-Doo thing and you haven't really watched too much Scooby-Doo stuff, you know, you're familiar with the characters, but you saw this thing was coming and you're like, gosh, darn, that's great. I get to watch a new Scooby-Doo thing. And you saw it and you're like, I don't know too much about these guys, but I know this ain't it. There are other Scooby-Doo shows, plenty of them. I believe the 2 best that people seem to agree are the 2 best examples of these, maybe the 2 most fun, are... it's not called Scooby-Doo Babies. Pup Named Scooby-Doo. The one where they're children is very funny. It's obviously, you know, directed towards children, but it's still good. I did watch that when I was younger, and I remember enjoying it. The other one is Mystery Incorporated, which is one of the more recent adaptations. There have been a couple, I think. What's New Scooby-Doo is the other one that I think is recent. I can't remember the name. Both of those are good. Both of those are very... like, they're a little different in that they feel like they're a refreshed version of the original, as opposed to this, which is a prequel, and B, kind of a take on the original. But the character, it takes itself just as seriously as you want, and it understands, and I think this is something that Velma's trying to do, and might get more of in the future, it understands what you expect from a Scooby-Doo show, and it doesn't necessarily subvert your expectations, but it does play with them in a way that's like, we're not just making the first show again. We are building on that in a way that is entertaining and smart. I know there's lots of Scooby-Doo shows. You can watch the one with, 13 Ghosts, that one. People like that one. Not really, but like some people do, and it's kind of funny. The one with Vincent Price. I think those are the best, but those 2 that I mentioned, Mystery Incorporated as the kind of refreshed version of the original, and then Pup Named Scooby-Doo as just a prequel version of the original, both very good. The movies are not very good. In terms of... That's not true. I mean, Scoob is not. I did not like Scoob. I don't know who it's for, except for Simon Cowell, but it doesn't quite work. But the originals are pretty fun to watch. They're very 2000s-y. Obviously, the second one's better than the first one, but the first one is a fun movie, but the second one's better at being a Scooby-Doo movie. And, I know Scott has made this point, Scott from NerdSync, who I'm sure will make a great Velma video one of these days. They should be in the reverse order. Scooby-Doo, Monsters Unleashed should be the first one, obviously. Let me just pull up my phone real quick, because I wrote a list. I think that's it. And there might be one more kind of show thing. Sex Lives of College. Oh, yeah. If you want a meta horror comedy. So let's say you like Velma. You don't really care as much about the mystery, although, that's going to be in a lot of horror things. But it doesn't have to be about mystery solvers as much as just you want kind of a high school, college kind of drama, but you want something that's in the area of like Scream or one of those shows where it is a horror show like Velma is doing, but the characters also know what a horror show is. So like the genre, they're going to talk about the genre conventions. It's very, very widely drawn characters, not like they're not super nuanced, but they do take these archetypes and say like, they're painting with a large brush. But let's say Velma didn't do it for you. Scream Queens, very funny, 2 seasons, maybe from about 5-6 years ago. It stars Emma Roberts and a bunch of other people who you'll be like, oh, him, and oh, him, and oh, her. Lots of people that are famous, more famous now. But both seasons are different murder mysteries, and they're both very funny. I did not think I'd like Scream Queens as much as I did, but I started watching it and I had a great time with it. I'm not sure how well it's aged, but I'm sure it holds up. It's not that, like, it wasn't, it didn't come out that long ago. Jamie Lee Curtis, everybody's favorite person from Everything Everywhere All at Once. She's in there. She's fantastic. It's a really good time. So, in conclusion, if you did not like Velma, you're a bad person who doesn't... No, it's fine. It's not a very good show. Nobody thinks so. I'm sure there's people that like it, and if you liked it, that's great. But if you don't like it, totally fine. It's kind of a one-off thing, though. There aren't very many shows like this. And it's not like they went out and said, we're going to make the wokest Velma. And look, obviously, you make the wokest show, it's bad. Because plenty of shows have been doing almost exactly the same thing and better. Like Harley Quinn. Let's say you're against the race. If your character's white, they should play by a white person. Okay, well, are you mad that Giancarlo Esposito plays Lex Luthor on that show? No, because he's awesome at it, and you can do that if it's good and if the casting works. So, I would say, if you don't like Velma, A, don't listen to the Jabornis. They don't know what they're talking about. They're usually wrong. B, watch those other things I said instead, which were Scream Queens, Pup Named Scooby-Doo, Mystery Incorporated, The After Party, Harley Quinn, Sex Lives of College Girls, and most importantly, Venture Brothers. All those are fun shows. You'll have a good time with them. And, unless it gets good, you never need to think about Velma again.